All righty. Hi, everyone. My name is Isabel Wright. I'm the Career Services Specialist here at Rossier. Welcome to our first event of the fall semester. With me, I have Ryan Alcantara, who is our Career Services Manager, as well as our speaker today, Ashley Henney. Great, Associate Director of Admissions at Sol Price. I'm going to go ahead and read her bio as well as give you a rundown of how it's going to go. Ashley will walk us through her career and her current role, as well as we'll ask a few questions and we'll open it up to the audience to ask their questions. So with that said, let me go ahead and read Ashley's bio. Ashley is the Associate Director of Admissions at Sol Price School of Public Policy, bringing over 5 years of admissions experience with a focus on graduate admissions. She leads strategic enrollment management initiatives, refining recruitment strategies, streamlining application review processes, and optimizing the use of customer relationship management systems for greater operational efficiency. With expertise in international credential analysis, Ashley offers a deep understanding of both domestic and global admissions landscapes. Proud alumna of the USC Rossier Master of Education in Enrollment Management and Policy program, she is passionate about student-centered graduate enrollment management and is currently pursuing a Doctor of Education in Education. Ashley, take it away. Thank you so much.
And actually, Ashley, just before we start, I'm going to take down the slide, but we've got a QR code on there. And so students, if you can scan that, that checks you into the event in Handshake. So I'll pull that off in a minute, but welcome to the event. And thank you, Ashley, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So the bio pretty much summed it up, but my name is Ashley. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently working as the Associate Director of Admissions at Price. Proud alum of the USC EMP program as well, the Enrollment Management Admissions Policy. That master's degree definitely changed my life for the better, and I'm currently working towards my Doctor of Education and Educational Leadership. So super fun. We had class until 10 p.m. last night, so that's always an exceptional time. But it's a really great group that we have in our current program. So thanks so much for joining. So I guess I'll try to talk a little bit about how I landed in admissions and kind of what my process was. I think that a lot of mentors of mine and peers of mine, I don't think anyone necessarily plans to work in admissions. I don't think you grow up when you're 5 years old and you think, oh, I want to be an admissions officer. I know certainly for myself, that was never like my dream career, or what I thought would be my dream career. But I kind of discovered it while actually being in college for my undergrad. So I was at Kalamazoo College, a really small liberal arts school in Michigan, and I was also an international student, so I'm originally from Germany, and so it was a really hard adjustment, a culture shock, and just getting to know the landscape. And what I really appreciated about the US college experience is actually the opportunity. There was a lot of opportunity that I wouldn't have otherwise had, especially within Germany, or just kind of that experience there. And so college really opened my eyes to, other things that I could be successful at. And I was working within the study abroad and career services office during my time at Kalamazoo College. And I just loved it. I loved helping students with their resumes. I loved meeting with them and talking about, study abroad opportunities, the application process. And I realized I was pretty good at it. And I just had a lot of fun with it. And I wanted something that didn't feel like I was working every single day, right? And so I was really torn between going to law school or working in higher education. I think it was just that weird concept of like, am I sure I want to work in admissions or higher ed? Because I didn't know anyone who was in that field at the time. And so I was a paralegal in DC for about a year, but I just did not feel as though it was my calling. It did not bring me the joy that, the admissions experience and working with students did. And so I quickly shifted gears and landed a really great opportunity at USC at the Central Graduate Admissions Office. And I think that really set up the trajectory of like where my career has headed. So my first position at USC was actually as an international graduate credentials analyst at the central office. And I know that sounds super exciting and so fun. And it definitely is to an extent. But I think that that position set me up so well in terms of like understanding education as like a whole system globally. I think especially working in admissions, now having that background of like how the other high school systems are set up, how students, wind up like applying to US colleges, especially internationally, was really helpful. And it gives you a lot of context about, how to communicate, especially with international students. It helps to say, oh, yes, like I know where you're coming from. It makes sense with, your education system, because every single education system across the globe is just so inherently different. It has such unique characteristics. And so I think that was an excellent background. But I think what really helped me the most in that role, and something that I'd love for you all to carry away too, is it's really important who your mentors are and also the leadership that you work under. So my first director at the Central Office of Graduate Admissions, he's still there, but now he's the Dean of Graduate Admissions, Joe Sanosa. He has been so pivotal in my career. And he just did such a great job of giving me the skill sets, confidence, and just all things knowledge that really led me to be successful in my career, and just always believing in me, I think is so huge. And so, especially working in higher education and having lived and worked in Washington, D.C., there's so many parallels when it comes to like the politics of higher education and the leadership. And so for me, it's been so great to follow good leadership. And so under Joe's leadership, I grew so much. And then when it was time to, expand and grow after graduating from USC Rossier with my master's degree, I actually wound up now working for his best friend. Marisol Rios is now the assistant dean of admissions at Price, and she's one of Joe's really good friends. And it's because of her great leadership that I've been allowed to grow. And again, I just think that there's so much value in following good leadership and following your mentors, because it's also about, where you want to grow and expand your career. And if you believe in them and you want to follow their leadership and where they end up, I think that's really beautiful. And they want to lift you up as much. So yeah, since working in the USC Price office, I originally started as a admissions counselor there right after my master's degree program. And USC Rossier did such a great job setting me up for success. My master's program was just so thorough and detailed. And whether it was the knowledge gain in terms of like the law and admissions practices, or even just like data and understanding how to use data, it helped me so much in my admissions counselor position that within 1 year, they promoted me, and I skipped a level. I didn't make assistant director. They promoted me to associate director. And so I think, all that being said, the education that you're receiving at USC Rossier and from your faculty is just so incredible and amazing. And I'm so grateful that all of us can kind of experience that. But working in admissions now specifically, I work a lot with the undergraduate programs. I'm primarily responsible for all of the USC Price undergraduate programs, which is very fun. And I'll talk more about the complexities there in a moment. But I also work with the graduate programs. So I'm currently managing a couple of graduate degree programs. And all that to say, admissions, that you have to wear a lot of hats. There are a lot of different items that I kind of take on, and both admissions processes are just so inherently different. I think one of the expectations going in, or what I didn't expect, having worked so thoroughly on the graduate admissions side for the 3 years prior to me beginning at Price, was I didn't realize how complex a decentralized large research university was, and working in admissions specifically, how challenging that could be. And so starting to work with the undergraduate admissions process and applicants, I didn't fully realize or understand like how a decentralized school would be centralized on the undergrad admissions side of it. So while I work in an academic department, I do interact with prospective undergraduate students and host information sessions, et cetera. I don't actually get to make the admissions decisions. Those are all handled by the central office, which is very, very odd. The only time I get involved in terms of reading the undergrad applications is for scholarship consideration for both the first years and also the transfer students. So very a rewarding experience for sure, but just a very different kind of set. Whereas on the graduate side, everything is done in-house. So my office and myself, we're responsible for processing all the transcripts, reading all of the applications, reviewing them with our admissions committee, sending out those admissions decisions, doing the marketing, customer service kind of relations. And so there's so many different facets. I think working at admissions, there's so much you can do. I think the important thing to take away though is setting important boundaries. I think a lot of the times, you know, working education, you're so motivated by students, which is so wonderful and beautiful. And I know that for myself, I'm very student centered, but you can wind up getting in trouble pretty quickly, especially if you love innovation and you love your students and you want to take on the whole world and fix everything all at once. But I think setting boundaries is definitely very important. And also collaborating and sharing. So that's been a little bit about my journey. I always feel so silly. I'm talking a little bit more about myself in front of like a blank screen, but I would love to kind of delve into more questions. So Isabella, I guess I'll let you take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That was very informative. So, what does a typical day in your role look like, and what does a non-typical day look like?
Oof, yeah, that's a really good question. I'll say that working at admissions, you'll never have a typical day. I feel like it's always something new, whether you find it exciting or not. I would say in terms of typical, though, if we wanted to generalize it a little bit, it really comes down to the season. I think that there's a very different, like typical day during the fall versus the spring and also the summer. So during the fall, which we're in right now, this is the beginning or start of our really busy time. And so a typical day might look like me going to a graduate recruitment fair. Yesterday, I was at an undergraduate recruitment fair. So can be lots of traveling depending on, you know, your unit and academic department. We're currently also working on some of our outreach initiatives. So right now I manage all of them. They always call it marketing. I don't like calling it marketing. I like saying it's student like outreach efforts that we're doing. So through Salesforce, I design and also implement a lot of our outreach strategies with, you know, email campaigns and all of that fun stuff. And it's really fun for me right now. So a typical day for me is like meeting with some of my current students and understanding, you know, what was kind of their mindset going into the application process. What anxieties did they have? Did they encounter imposter syndrome? And thinking about any video content that I could kind of create with that, because I think it's important to share those narratives and just be vulnerable at the same time with prospective students. So that's kind of in the fall towards December, and then throughout April, we are reading. I think that, oh man, I probably read close to 1,000 applications or so every year, probably a little bit more. And so you'll get really quick at reading. I don't know if y'all know the Court of Thorns and Roses book series that came out, but I finished that in about a week just because I've just gotten so quick at reading, and people are like, "How are you reading so quickly?" I'm like, "This is my job." But no application's the same. So even in the springtime, there isn't like a typical day. There are some days where like it's really exciting and you're reading incredible, motivating and inspiring essays. So that's always fun. Obviously, there's some that are, you know, motivating, but a little sad at the same time. So that's fun. Doing information sessions, meeting with prospective students, and also communicating with my current students. An untypical day would probably be a slow day. Where there are no fires and nothing very like to worry about too much. But yeah, I think in summertime is when we're a little bit slower, but it's also hard with admissions because your vacation time is pretty limited. You can't really go on vacation, you know, end of fall or until maybe late spring, I would say. So that's something to take into consideration. But I like to say we're saving PDFs and not live. So that's kind of what I remind my staff when we're really stressed out. I think it's so important to remember like what we're doing is important, but also to take time for yourself.
It's important. Thank you so much. And I know you are a current student as well. So how do you juggle, you know, all the roles and responsibilities that you have while also enriching your credentials and doing your coursework?
Yeah, that's been super challenging. I think especially my first year in this role because you know, this is my first time being a full-time employee and also a manager. So I do manage a good number of individuals, and one of my wonderful student workers is actually here, Bree. She helps me with my student ambassador program, and she does such an excellent job, but we manage like 60 students every year. And so Time management is very, very important. I would say working smarter and not harder is a really good concept. I think one of the tools that I've found to be so useful is actually OneNote, and Bree already knows this. It's like my favorite contraption or device. Because you can upload any and all documents, whether it's for my course readings to anything that I need for work, even some feedback. For example, if I have one of my staff members create any kind of digital materials that I need to review, I can just quickly make notes and share them via OneNote so that they can review and make edits as necessary. I think also making sure that you are taking care of your mind and body. I know that my first fall semester, so this time last fall, it was very difficult to kind of get back into that mindset, making sure I was capable of managing my time correctly. And I honestly failed a little bit, which is totally fine and normal. And it wasn't until I realized like, oh, you actually need to like work out. You actually like need to like nourish your body to be successful. That was like a very important lesson to learn. But finally, I think just being vulnerable with your faculty is so important and key. I mean, I think every faculty member that I've had at USC Ross here has been so great at understanding that we're working professionals, and they realize like how important our work is to us, and just letting them know, hey, I'm not going to make this deadline. I was always the type A student who never missed a deadline. I was always straight A's. I always read every single thing, and working full time and doing a program as well, it's just not reasonable. And it's okay to just say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to make this. The first few times asking for an extension was they're so brutal and I absolutely hated it. But it's really, you do yourself such a disservice by not even asking for an extension. And I think you'd be surprised by how many faculty are like willing to give you some extra time and grace when it's needed, especially for work. So yeah, and reading for fun, I think just doing something for fun, whether it's working out, again, is just so important. But it's easier said than done. I do get into those cycles where I'm just like all work and no play. And then you always have to kind of remind yourself what's important and making time for friends and family too.
Great, thank you. I have a few more questions, but I'm not sure if, because I also am here myself talk, if anyone else in the audience has questions. I'm happy to continue asking, but I want to give some time to anyone else.
Don't be shy, we're all friends.
Okay, well, we'll keep going, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to jump in. Another one that comes into play is, how do challenges related to equity, power, and privilege manifest in your work?
That's such an important question. I think especially being an admissions officer and also working with that admissions committee, there are so many power dynamics at play there, and it's really hard to grapple with. I think especially when it comes to admissions, when we're looking at a holistic application, I think a lot of the time it's easy for some of our faculty maybe to get caught on a GPA, but for you as an admissions officer to really highlight the full set of stories of why, what makes this applicant so special and really advocating for them. I always tell our prospective students, I'm here to be your biggest support system, your cheerleader in all things. And so for me, it's not about looking for reasons not to admit somebody. It's for looking for reasons to admit somebody, I think is really important. So along admissions line, that's what I would say. In terms of like outreach and admissions too, I always think about how to reach out or connect with students. And so going back to some of the content elements and video design, I think especially on the graduate level, people don't talk about imposter syndrome enough. And it is such an important element. And it's one of the reasons I ended up, pursuing my Doctor of Education, because it's just, I feel like graduate students just like don't really get that kind of support. There's so much like hand holding, I feel like, on the undergrad level. And then it's like you turn a certain age or you graduate with your undergrad degree and suddenly we're adults and we all know what we're doing. And so that's just like frankly not the truth. So really breaking down some of those outreach efforts and really being personable and approachable, I think, for students as well, I think is really important. I always like when I was growing up thinking about admissions, I would always think about those like snooty Harvard, maybe admissions counselors, like just having all that power at their grasp and deciding like who to admit and who not. And I have made it like my life's mission not to ever be that person, right? because I'm here to really give prospective students the tools, knowledge, and confidence necessary to not only apply to USC Price, which I think is like one of the best schools for public policy, but just elsewhere, I think is really important too. So you can definitely build in a lot of equity efforts within admissions role, and that's something I really appreciate because we want to be innovative, we want to expand. There are so many ways to do that, especially if you're collaborating with a really great team, which I'm fortunate enough to have.
Great, thank you. And I have a question from the audience. I'll read it out loud. For someone who has worked a year full-time in admissions counseling, more the territory manager type role, and is super interested in working at USC full-time in admissions, what kind of advice would you give as they decide whether they want to do TM roles or in-school admission roles?
Yeah, I think attending things just like this amazing session today is a really great and important step. I also think reaching out individually for just like informal interviews. It doesn't even have to be an interview. Grab coffee with somebody and just learn more about their experiences, their role, and what it entails. I think reaching out to our alumni network especially, but even the admissions officers that are over at Central Undergrad Admissions, I know that they love connecting with other prospective students, or not prospective students, but other current students at USC Rossier who are prospectively, interested in working at Central. I think something to also keep in mind, I know that especially right now in today's job market, it can be really defeating applying for roles and not getting them. And I think really giving yourself grace during that time too is really important. It is inherently very difficult to always get that first job within an institution. And what's so interesting about higher education is that each individual school, even within USC, but also just externally, any other school, there are such different processes in place, policies in place, different platforms being utilized. And so giving yourself grace in that aspect, but also ask other people to get familiar with their CRM system. So whether that be Slate, Salesforce, get familiar with what internal software systems are being utilized at other institutions, even at USC, just to get exposure so that during an interview you can say, I have seen and heard a lot about this information system. So it will make you stand out if you already know what systems are being used and maybe even familiarizing yourself with some of those tools as well. Good question.
Great, thank you for that. Another question from the audience. What has been one of the biggest hurdles you have faced when you first entered the field of higher ed?
That is a really important one. I think even getting into the university system, like I said, that was a very significant hurdle, especially USC. USC is definitely known for being like a family, right? And so once you're already like a staff member, a student, faculty within USC, it's great. But if you're on the outside, it can be really hard to make your way in. So networking is a huge, huge thing. I think working in higher ed in general as a female identifying individual can be really challenging, especially when you are young. I always say I feel like I look like I'm 12, even though I'm 30. And so I think it's really easy for people to, not take advantage, that sounds bad, but to really kind of overstep maybe at times and also not give you the credit that is due. And so again, having a good support system and finding validation yourself and maybe amongst family might be better during your beginning stages of your career, but it does get better. And I think, again, your work will speak for itself. So you don't have to think too much or too hard, but it is challenging in the moment. I think the other hurdles and I mentioned this before, is just the politics in higher education. You have to be politically pretty savvy, and that can be really hard to adapt to. I did not expect that at all. Coming from DC, I didn't realize I was going to be in the exact same playing field, just with other players, basically. But I think when you're pushing through initiatives and especially relating it to DEI efforts, it's really important to really hone in on those leadership skills that Rossier builds into you and instills in you. Definitely, getting buy-in from others and working collaboratively, and remembering that it's not about your own accomplishments, but you're doing it for the betterment of the students. And so as long as you're student driven and centered, that usually is a really good starting point and foundation or common ground that you can work off together. But yeah, that's been a huge hurdle, especially within the individual academic unit. So definitely getting to know your players. And yeah, working on emotional intelligence is also really big.
Thank you. Another question from the audience: how soon after finishing your master's program were you able to land your full-time role at USC?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not able to fully answer that only because I was already working as a full-time staff member and doing my program while I was working at USC. I think that what really helped me jump so quickly in my career, though, going back, is just the comprehensive curriculum, right? So really taking advantage of everything that your program has to offer, the career resources. And again, networking, I think that's something that I didn't really notice was happening, just very organically and naturally, at least in my program, was my faculty set me up so well with mentors across our campus. One of my amazing mentors who helped me with my master's capstone project is actually the dean of admissions at the law school. And it was just such an organic kind of natural networking opportunity. But he's given me such great opportunities and helped me further network and establish my career. And so with that being said, I think that you're able to find those roles as long as you're really taking advantage, especially of that networking piece. The faculty, especially on our campus, they really know a lot of different players. So just ask your faculty, hey, like, how would I, get into admissions or central undergrad admissions? Do you know anyone there? Because chances are they do know somebody who they're willing to connect you to kind of learn more about what that role is and if there are other opportunities available for you to pursue.
Great, thank you. With that, what kind of skill sets or trainings do individuals need in order to serve in a role like yours?
Oh, yeah, I wear many hats, and I think it's I unfortunately created the mess for myself a little bit. I think when I came onto USC Price, we had just brought in our own Salesforce system, so a very big beast of a CRM. And so before we had no kind of like marketing or even outreach platforms or anything established really. And now we're running close to 30 different email campaigns every single year, which is a lot. And so all that being said, that's one skill set, like the marketing skill set, the Salesforce skill set. But then there's also the admission side and, the personable side of wanting to really connect with prospective students. And so depending on what kind of area you're most interested in, I think the most transferable or best skills to have for admissions is communication, emotional intelligence, and just being able to kind of connect with prospective students. That's a really great skill set to have. I think the other one that's really helped me throughout, regardless of which hat I'm wearing, is just data. There's so much that you can do and accomplish with data. And so one of the best skills I've ever kind of given myself is, learning how to do quantitative analysis pretty extensively, just through Excel, just so that I can really tell a story with data, that I can make arguments with data, because it's pretty hard to argue against data, right? But also keeping in mind that, quantitative analysis and data pieces, they only tell part of the story. And so it's really important for you to also take in consideration the meaning behind those numbers and have some qualitative elements. And so the way that I do that is connecting with current students, but there are other ways to do that as well. But data really sets you up for such success, and staying on top of data trends in terms of like enrollment, right? There's so much happening within the enrollment trends across the United States and the upcoming birth dearth. And yeah, by 2037, it's going to be a very different field. But I think the other ones too, I don't think that AI is going anywhere. I don't think that CRMs are going anywhere. And so the more skills you're able to kind of develop in terms of Salesforce, Slate, things in that nature are also really great and key aspects and skills that I would definitely highlight. And there are different courses that you can take nowadays. So I don't know if Coursera offers them, but I think those platforms are really important. They're becoming more increasingly important for many institutions. So lastly, I would say just getting really comfortable with presentations, public speaking. It used to be one of like the things that I dreaded the most, but you get used to it when you're kind of thrown in front of like 100 and 150 people. So yeah. But yeah, I like that question. Thank you.
Great. Who are your key collaborators, and how has their background and or role differ from or similar or from yours?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and kind of relating it back to the politics of it all, especially within a small department like USC Price. I would say my main collaborators outside of the office or outside of my direct role would be the academic advisors. I think it's really important for people in admissions to be very familiar with, you know, the academic advisement piece, because when we are meeting with prospective students, again, I am not a bad car salesman. I'm not there to kind of just promise you the world without kind of being able to back that up. So being familiar what is presented to current students and how, you know, issues in terms of curriculum, course sequencing work, that's really important for us to know, and also just keep them the know on like curriculum changes, program changes, things like that. And even student behavior, I think post-COVID on the undergraduate level, it's been really interesting to meet and speak with academic advisors to understand their experiences with current students. And academic advisors also have a lot of buy-in with faculty. So the way to really push the mark over, especially when it comes to DEI or other initiatives that you want to do, it's really great to have an academic advisor in your corner. So that's very beneficial. Pro tip number one. I think number two would be, I work very closely with one of my colleagues, John Mendoza. He's actually also a USC Ross Sierra alum, and he's currently doing the EDD program with me. And he is our assistant director of scholarships and diversity recruitment. And I think working really closely with somebody who understands financial aid, funding, scholarships, and also has the know-how to look at our budget financing within a department, that's always just so great to have at your back pocket. Because if there's something you want to push through, for example, a new scholarship initiative, having John there to collaborate with and kind of understand how we can push the needle past the finish line is really great and important. And then also faculty. And like I said, it's really important to have faculty buy-in, especially tenure faculty. They really don't have as much to lose. And so for me, working really strategically with faculty has been really beneficial as well, especially for projects or things that I want to get done for our students and for Price. It's really great to have a faculty member there. I think working collaboratively is really great. And again, as long as you're reminding yourself that it's, you know, student centered and served. With that, I mean that I know that there are some colleagues who often can get frustrated with not getting credit maybe for like an initiative or a project that they propose to do and they don't feel like they have gotten credit. But I always kind of try to remind my colleagues and also direct reports that ultimately we're doing it for the students, not necessarily for our own self kind of serving purposes and achievements. So yeah, but those would be my key collaborators, co-conspirators, as I like to call them.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to continue opening it up to students, the audience. Do you have any questions for Ashley?
Yeah, I have one.
Great, go ahead.
I actually sorry for coming a little late. Just hopped out of a meeting, and so my question is, and sorry if this is asked already. My question is, my background has always been with residential life, student conduct, like the student-facing job once they come on campus. But I also have international background, working with international students, and then connections abroad with other recruitment agencies, you know, application agencies, stuff like that. So my question is, like, in terms of transferable skills and intending to make a lateral move from like the student facing side of things, right? Like student life, residential life, to the admission side of things in different colleges or from the university. How does one acquire that lateral? Like what needs to be prepared for that? I'm also in the EDD program in my third year, so so this will be a sort of like a subfield in career that I want to try out. So here's a question.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great question. There are a couple of things that I would say. One, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Strengths Finders Assessment. It's a really great career workshop that's offered. I think Central USC Career Services offers it, but it basically identifies top 5 skill sets of yours. It's been so beneficial for I know for myself, especially in interviews, to have, they give you like 5 adjectives. So one of mine, for example, is maximizer. And so being able to relate that in an interview, accordingly, saying like, you know, I used to work in residential life and I'm a maximizer. So this is what I've done to maximize, you know, my skill sets with students that way. I think that always helps with interviews and standing out. But so I would probably suggest that because that's also really helpful to have in your back pocket. But then in terms of the transferable skill sets, and you have such a like robust background, I think your skills in working in residential life, communicating with students, it sounds like there are a lot of stakeholders involved. I think those are aspects that I would really highlight, whether that be in your cover letter, your interview process, and managing conflict too. Is definitely, it sounds like that would be inherent in a role like that. I think is really helpful. I think when it comes down to your recruitment experiences and working with students, and again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but it's really different when you're talking about admissions for undergraduate versus graduate. So depending on what kind of field you want to go into, for undergraduate experiences, I think being able to say, you know, I'm very familiar with working with international students and their academic backgrounds, you know, internationally, and knowing other educational systems is really important. I think too, for students, and I know that when I meet with prospective students, understanding the visa application process, OPT, and understanding, you know, how to support students and going through that process and even getting a job post college is also really impactful. But I think ultimately your backgrounds really set you up for just being able to connect with students, and ultimately that I think is one of the best skill sets to have, and that really sets you apart. But from somebody who's interviewed for an admissions counselor position and manages an admissions counselor role, some of the questions that I ask my interviewees is, you know, how do you manage your time efficiently? How do you make sure that you're meeting a lot, or making sure that all projects are getting done with, you know, pressing deadlines, all conflicting with one another? And also thinking about how you are able to show that you are innovative and somebody who can think outside of the box. I think the higher ed is always changing, especially with AI and things in that nature. So the more innovation you can show, that's always something that really stands out to me. It's mainly about being able to really connect with somebody. So I'm happy to further chat. I think that your background and might be a little bit more unique too. So I'm happy to delve in a little bit deeper. I'll put my email address in here too if you want to connect.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a follow-up question from the audience. Would you say that admissions efforts, counselors and staff are supported well by USC as a whole, by USC administration, interested in the culture that is fostered in admissions at USC?
Yeah, that's such a important and great question to ask. Again, it's difficult for me to answer for the central undergraduate admissions team. I think that it's also difficult to answer as an individual academic department. I think what's unique about USC and other big, large research institutions is just the decentralization. And so the resources and support available at one department might not be available to another department, right? I think that it ultimately also comes down to the internal culture in terms of support. I think this past year was definitely also a game changer after the SCOTUS decision to strike down affirmative action. And so I think the admissions team, especially on the undergraduate level, we saw a lot of kind of differences in personal statements and all of that stuff. And so because of the different nature of the personal statements, I know that a few of our staff or the undergraduates, you know, really tapped into the mental health resources because it is a lot. It is stressful and it's hard to, you know, read some statements that are a little bit heartbreaking at times. So in terms of internal departmental support systems on the graduate level / within an academic graduate unit, I would say, again, it comes down to the individual program as well. At Price, we are a smaller department on our campus. And so while there are support services that are, you know, available to us from the central offices, I think the majority of our support really comes from like the strength of working with collaborative staff members and finding support within our community. And something that I find very beautiful for a small department too is also finding that support within current students. I think that that was something very special that I've been lucky enough to kind of experience, being really close with my students and knowing that they're there to support me as much as I am them. So
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? I have a few more, but I want to make sure that you all have a chance as well. Okay. What resources, organizations, or associates have helped you grow and continue learning about your role and industry?
oof, that's such a good question. Some great resources. I think if you have not already signed up for, there's so many newsletters that are specifically designed for admissions. EAB is one that I follow pretty religiously. They're just really on top of it when it comes to admissions and all things. But in terms of like individual resources or more personal ones, I think your mentors are always going to be key, individuals, faculty too. I know that I've stayed really close with my faculty members. So working closely with the dean of admissions over at the law school, he's just been so amazing, and he's just so innovative in his practices. And so keeping up with him is always a really great effort there. Faculty members, I'm still very close with Jerry Lucido from our program. I currently also have one of my mentors, Kedra Iship. I had her in my master's and now again. So they do an excellent job of staying up to date. And then I would say at Price specifically, we have some really great efforts going on, especially from Dr. Lavana Lewis. She's our Vice Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Price. And she does a really great job of hosting monthly and also bi-weekly workshop series that pertain specifically for DEI efforts happening at Price. And she offers a lot of spaces for us as a community to come together, which I think is beautiful because it brings together faculty, staff, undergrad, graduates, and even some of our alumni to really talk about some pressing issues, whether that be in our community directly at USC as a whole or just kind of nationally or internationally. It's just such a great opportunity for me to learn about maybe other resources or support systems that are available for students, staff, faculty, and keeping up with, the latest kind of student, behaviors and understanding where our students are also at mentally, I think is really important, especially just during these times, especially with the election coming up at a public policy school. It's really important for us to kind of keep an eye on too. So yeah.
Great, thank you for that. What's one piece of advice that you wish someone would have shared with you before taking on this position? Follow up to that, what recommendations do you have for students who are graduating and interested in entering this field?
Wow, one piece of advice. That's so hard to narrow down into just one. One piece of advice, I think, and again, speaking as a female identifying individual, I think as a woman myself, I've always felt the need to really just show that I deserve my current role. I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome that goes in, especially when you're so young and you're climbing your career. You kind of question yourself, like, do I deserve to be here? Do I deserve to be in this space? And so I guess one piece of advice I would have loved to have is always believe in yourself. You're capable of so much more. And just learning how to find validation within yourself. I think that's a really hard lesson to learn, but the sooner you can learn it, the better, because you are capable of so much, and it doesn't matter. If the people who are the loudest are the most insecure, so don't worry about it too much, right? Your work will show for itself. For students about to enter this field, I think it's really important to have an idea or a sense of what specifically about admissions really is appealing to you. And it kind of goes back to another piece of advice I wish I would have given myself. I just love innovation. I love being involved. I love connecting dots. And so kind of ran into this problem of now I'm managing multiple things at a time, and they've become these ginormous projects. And I wish I would have just kind of focused on maybe, working just with marketing or outreach efforts as opposed to maybe doing a lot more strategic long-term initiatives and planning for the undergrad programs specifically. So having a general sense of where you want to work in admissions, I think would be helpful. Understanding undergrad from graduate alone is such an important element. I think a lot of the times when we're talking about admissions, the automatic thought is like undergrad admissions, but there's a whole world of graduate admissions that has not been explored. There is a lack of knowledge, research, and also just resources really in place for the graduate admissions roles and aspects and realms. So again, why I'm pursuing my doctorate is kind of to fill those gaps. But I think just having a general idea, and again, meeting with people, like meet with me if you want to learn more about graduate admissions or even undergrad, meet with your other mentors, faculty, to understand just the scope of admissions, because there's so much you can do.
Follow up to that, can you touch on the differences between undergrad admissions and graduate admissions for folks who want to know more?
Yeah, definitely. So it really goes down to the structure of an institution. And so for me, when we're looking at USC specifically, the organizational structure is largely decentralized, right? It's a really big university. You can't just kind of manage it all within one department. But what's interesting about such a large decentralized campus is that the undergrad admissions piece, and this is the same at a lot of institutions, all the undergrad admissions decisions are through Central. So again, as somebody who works with undergraduate admissions and applications, I am not actually the one who's making the admissions decisions on the undergraduate level. I meet with prospective students. I can have info sessions, talk to them about our programs, but the only real time I'm involved in terms of reading applications and making decisions is during the scholarship pieces of it. And so that's very different because it's very, it seems hands off. I promise you, you'll still be very involved with the undergraduate programs, but keeping that in mind. And so with that being said, within Central, and I've never worked within the Central undergraduate office, but that office in itself is a beast all on its own. I mean, they have different admissions counselors, officers for different regions, whether that be in the United States or just around the world. There's a lot of travel involved, a lot of reading, a lot of emails, and just supporting students throughout their journey, which has gotten inherently a little bit more challenging. I think with all of this is no secret. I think there's so much more pressure when it comes to admissions these days. I can't imagine being a young student, prospective undergraduate student applying with social media and all of these things. There's so much pressure. And so, you know, for me on the undergraduate level, it's really trying to alleviate those anxieties and stressors, I think is really big. On the graduate side, the differences are that it is so autonomous. I mean, every single graduate department on our campus just operates very differently. We all kind of manage our own finances and budgets. And so while, you know, USC Marshall Business School may have, you know, more resources and finances at their disposal, as a small, you know, we have just a smaller department. And so for us, it might be challenging to kind of accomplish more with maybe a little bit less. And so with graduate programs, you work very collaboratively, very closely with your team. And it is really a team effort, right? You can't accomplish everything on your own. With graduate admissions, again, you can wear a lot of different hats. And that's why I say it's really great to kind of know and have a niche of which part of admissions is something you really fancy going into, whether that be just recruitment, working events, meeting with prospective students, or maybe doing outreach marketing initiatives, or even doing a Salesforce or Slate admin position. There's a lot in terms of like IT consulting that you can go into. But while we may all report to one, you know, head president, it is just so large. It's like a big beast of decentralized different departments.
Thanks, Ashley. That was very informative. Does anyone else have any questions before we start to wrap up?
Just to follow up, it's got Clifton Strength, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, I have one more question. Do you anticipate having any open positions in your department that you would be willing to share, whether now or in the future?
Yeah, right now I don't think, at least in my office, no, we're currently fully staffed. And I think for admissions positions, you specifically want to look for open roles for like an admissions counselor position sometime during the summertime. I would say the week after following commencement all the way through December, no, I would say probably September is when you can find the best position openings for admissions positions. One of my pro tips that I would say too is that if you're seeing an admissions counselor position opening December to February, sometimes that can be a red flag, and definitely do your due diligence following up with the department, just because that's a very weird time for somebody to leave an office. And while there may be other reasons associated, I would be careful with roles like that, just given the time frame. Typically, admissions counselors don't just leave in the middle of a cycle, but always follow up is my piece of advice there.
Thank you. I have one more question from the audience. Do you feel like there is professional mobility for admissions for someone who wants to start in admissions and move to a different area in higher ed?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are so many opportunities there, especially now that we're going into more of like a Salesforce Slate era with CRMs, AI, all of that stuff. I think there's going to be a huge development in educational consulting businesses. I already know that there are like independent counselors, for example, that have already established great careers, their own consulting firms, just to advise undergraduate or even graduate prospective students, even med students, and also professional level like law school students. So I would say there's a lot of flexibility there, and especially if you become more and more familiar with Salesforce, Slate. There are individuals or peers of mine that I know who end up working at Deloitte, for example, and Salesforce kind of consulting arena. So I do think that there's flexibility. And I think too, recruitment can sometimes feel very salesy. Again, I'm very student-centered and driven, but I do know folks that kind of transition into maybe more of a sales or marketing role that are not at institutions maybe. So I think there are a lot of skill sets that are transferable as well.
I also have another, oh yeah, there in the chat. Is there a stigma against independent consultants who seek a position in admissions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it ultimately depends on what your consulting firm is what their mission is, what their values are, right? Because I think that there can be independent consultants who are very maybe money driven, where they're working with a specific clientele of students. And so as somebody who is very student driven and really passionate about DEI efforts, especially when it comes to admissions practices, I have a tough time always just having a conversation with independent consultants for that reason, because I think that I want to be talking with the student and not necessarily a consultant maybe, because most of the time it's the consultant reaching out to me and it's not the student. I'm like, I don't even know if the student is interested in our programs, right? But in terms of like getting into the admissions piece, I think really getting a better sense of what that university is. I think there are pros and cons. Like if you learn a lot about a specific institution like USC as an independent consultant, you may have a lot of great knowledge and expertise in USC or another institution specifically, and great transferable skill sets. I would say that it's maybe a little bit challenging to get a role just given the nature of independent consultants in the past though. But that's why, again, like networking and really getting to know people that might be hiring for a role, and really showcasing who you are and how student driven and centered you are would be my advice there.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? We're just about wrapping up. We have a few more minutes.
I'll just add to the conversation. I don't know, Ashley, not to put you on the spot, but you talked about the difference between undergraduate and graduate admissions, but sectors. I mean, there's a lot of different approaches, say at a CSU versus a UC, small privates. So there's a lot of diversity, even just within the admissions and outreach space. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, or how students can kind of learn to navigate or get some insights on how to decide like which area should I be exploring.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that. That is such an insightful question. And so, yeah, to your point, every every institution, every individual department can look so different when it comes to admissions. So for example, at Price, our office, in terms of the admissions office, we're the ones who are really like processing transcripts, meeting with prospective students, and are the first readers for applications before we kind of go to another faculty committee meeting and kind of make our final decisions there, and then, you know, share those decisions. But there are a lot of other departments, especially on the graduate level, like Dornsife, for example, they have it very individual. So the Department of Economics, for example, they run their admissions solely by themselves. And typically for bigger departments like that too, who are working really closely with faculty, there are positions where you're both the admissions counselor and also the academic advisor, which is very strange and difficult to navigate. And so for them too, they might be reporting to a faculty member, whereas for me, I'm reporting to a staff member. I'm reporting to somebody who directly just works solely for admissions purposes and is very familiar with the realm of enrollment management, admissions. But as somebody who's maybe working under a faculty member and processing admissions, it can be very different and also difficult at times, just because faculty members, while they're really great experts and have maybe been in the admissions field, there's so much that's changed. And for them, admissions may not be like their primary role or aspect of their position. And so it can be really difficult to kind of change the processes in place. And so when you're thinking about entering admissions on the graduate level within a department, it's really important to understand what the organizational structure is, who you'd be reporting to, and understanding the different power dynamics, I guess, in terms of working with a faculty versus working for a staff member. The reporting structures can just be very, very different there. Even again, like the resources and support available can be really different.
Great, thank you. Any other questions as we begin to wrap up? Ashley, that was very insightful. Thank you. I learned a thing or two about admissions that I didn't know about. So I really appreciate your valuable insights and just how you juggle everything. It was so insightful. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That concludes this portion of our workshop. We have a few upcoming events. Ryan, if you want to share your screen. Yep.
Sure. So just a reminder, if you got in late, we're encouraging students to check in just so we know you were here. So you can just hit that QR code and then our upcoming events. So we'll continue our deep dive series, and all signups are handled through Handshake for students. So you can access there. And then we'll begin next week with a number of other events. So those are listed out on the third. There's the AI career series, and we're having a series this semester too with collegiate teaching with your Rossier degree, and so we'll have a community college focus starting off on the 7th. But make sure to check out our various events. We'd love to see you at them, and all the events are recorded and available on our YouTube channel, Rossier's YouTube channel. There's a career playlist, so you can check out past events there.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you everyone for attending. I'll be on if you all have any questions, but other than that, thank you so much for coming.